We've been talking about consumer choice. Okay, so why are we talking about consumer choice? Let's just do a big picture. Let's go 30,000 foot. So we're talking about microeconomics. We've looked at the issue of, scarcity and the fact that we can't have everything we want. We need to make some choices. There's an opportunity cost to those choices because the fact of the matter is choice brings with it giving one thing up in order to get something else. We've also talked about the law of supply and demand and plotting supply and demand in order to be able to kind of estimate what the price is going to be and what the quantities will be sold. We've also gone on to talk about, okay, well, if that's the case, then with supply and demand, we say, well, how is supply and demand applied in the real world? And we talked about some of the issues there that supply and demand, or the market, we'll call it, what that solves and some of the challenges it brings to the market and problems in society. And then last week we talked about elasticity and the issue of how sensitive people are to price changes in terms of, okay, the price got changed. Are you going to buy as much? Are you going to buy less? How much less? A lot less or a little bit less? So that's kind of everything we've done so far. Now we're taking all of that and we're saying, okay, so you're a consumer. You're an individual. You're going out there in the world and you recognize that there are such a thing as opportunity cost. You recognize that we have this concept of elasticity that says, our price is going to affect how much of something we buy. And what we're doing now is talking about a theory that comes from all of that. And the basic theory in terms of consumer choice says that as consumers, as rational people, we are going to do everything we can to squeeze the most out of every dollar we have to spend. In other words, we're going to maximize our utility. That's economics talk for squeezing everything we can out of every dollar we have. At this yesterday, so I'll look at it now. Melissa's margin utility per dollar spent for apples and pears is given in the following table. How many of each kind of fruit she purchase if she can only make 9 purchases? So here we're looking at the total number of purchases. So we just simply look at this. We'll say, okay, here's our margin utility per dollar spent. And we just glaze through them, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 18, 14, 10. So as rational consumers, we're going to want to maximize your utility. We're going to go buy, if we're going to put our hands on something first, it's going to be an apple because it has a marginal utility of 18, which is higher than all the rest. And then we'll say, well, let's go back to the pound again and say, what are we going to buy next? Well, if I look, the second apple has a marginal utility of 14. The first pear only has a marginal utility of 9. I'm buying another apple. Then I go back again and I say, what am I going to buy now? Well, a third apple has a marginal utility of 10. And first pear, only 9. So I'm buying another apple. So I bought 3 apples. Then I say, well, what's next? What's the next highest? Well, the next highest is this first pear. It's 9. It's higher than this one over here, so I'm going to buy a pear. Then I say, well, what's next? Well, 8. A second pear has 8, which is more than the 6 for the fourth apple. And in fact, the third pear has 7. And then I'm going to say, well, what? I got a choice to make. Look, I can go and the fourth apple or the fourth pear are tied, 6 and 6. So really, I'm indifferent. I can buy one or the other. So let's assume I buy this one. Well, then I make another iteration, and I say, well, I'm going to buy this one here because it, again, has the highest utility. And then finally, for my 9th item, I'm going to buy the one that has the next highest utility. I could buy a pear because it has a margin utility per dollar spent of 5, which is higher than 2. So the total combination of items that I would buy is 5 pears and 4 apples. Any questions on that? Okay. We also have this example here that I haven't looked at yesterday. Nikki is considered buying some fruit. His total utility for apples and bananas is shown in the following table. complete the marginal utility column. So here we just going to complete these marginal utility columns. Here's an example. So let's just get our head around it first. Here's apples and the quantity of apples, 1 through 6, the total utility, and the marginal utility. And we're really asked, what is the marginal utility? Well, the marginal utility, keep in mind, is the amount of utility that changes between 1 and the next. So it went from 0 to 1. 0 to 1, 40 minus 0 is 40. Then we went from 1 to 2. 70 minus 40 is 30. Then we went from 2 to 3. 88 minus 70 is 18. 104 minus 88, 16. 118 minus 104, 14. And 130 minus 118, 12. So this is our marginal utility, which is measuring the difference between each successive one. You notice that marginal utility is declining as we go along, which makes sense because the more of a given item we have, the less valuable each successive item is in terms of pleasure. So that's apples. And we can look at bananas and do exactly the same thing. Well, from 0 to 30 is 30. From 30 to 54 is 24. From 54 to 72 is 18. 10, 8, and 5. So this is what we call the marginal amounts. And you'll notice that the marginal declines. So that was A. If Nikki has a budget of $8 and the prices of both apples and bananas is $1 each, how much will she purchase? Well, she got $8 and each one is $1. So she's going to end up purchasing 8 items. And she's going to go up here and she's going to look at the marginal utility for each item, and she's going to say which one offers the most value. Well, the first apple has a marginal utility of 40, which is higher than all the rest. So she's going to get 1 apple. That's going to be her first purchase, is an apple. Then she goes back again and says, well, what should I buy next? Well, a second apple has a marginal utility of 30, and a first banana has a marginal utility of 30. So she's indifferent. So let's assume that she buys a banana. Okay, and then she goes back again, a third item. Well, the second apple has a marginal utility of 30. She's going to buy that. Then a fourth item. Well, what's the next highest level utility? 24 versus 18, right? Because we got 2 apples already. A third apple is 18. A second banana is 24. We're going to pick 24. So the banana. Then we go back again and say, what are we going to buy next? Well, the third apple is 18. The third banana is 18. We're indifferent. We'll buy 1. And then the next go, we'll buy another. So that's 6 items we've got. Then we say, well, what are we going to buy next? Well, 16 for the fourth apple versus 10 for the fourth banana. We're going to buy an apple. 14 for a fifth apple versus 10 for a fourth banana. We're going to buy an apple. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, I got all my money spent now. So effectively, I made my choice based on what gives me the maximum utility. Then it goes on to say, suppose the price of apples increased to $2. So what we do here is we say, okay, the apples were $1. So the marginal utility per dollar is we just take the 40 and divide it by 2, 30 divided by 2, 8 divided by 18 divided by 2, and so on. So we get the utility per dollar. We don't have to do anything with this because this is per dollar, right? These are exactly $1. And then we do the same thing again using the revised utility. Okay? And you could draw the demand curve for apples and demand curve for bananas. All we need to do is look at the quantity and how many we sell for each of those, and you can draw that. Any questions? Okay, here's the material for today. That first part is really critical to your understanding, okay? So very good, a lot of theory there, and you say, well, what practical difference does this make in the world? Well, looking at practical applications of this next section looks at the very thing, applications of marginal utility. And one of the first things that this theory does is it explains why our favorite things are not always our favorites. Okay, so here I got this little cartoon. I ate 1 hamburger and it tasted great. The next 2 tasted okay. I wish I hadn't eaten the 5th, and I can't finish the 6th. So what we're seeing here is a classic example of hamburgers. Someone saying, I ate so many of them that I got sick. Well, what happens? You may be a lover of hamburgers, or I may be a lover of cheesecake. And I say, okay, great. But I love one piece of it because the utility diminishes the more and more I have of a given item in a very short period of time. So even though it's my favorite item, it may not be my favorite if I've already had 3 of them. In fact, something else may become my new favorite because I'd rather have a coffee now because I've had enough cheesecake. Put that aside. So effectively what we're saying here is after consuming a certain quantity, its marginal utility per dollar spent drops to the point that other things become more attractive. So that's why we're not always walking around or living with always buying the same item. We often find that if we got enough of that item, if I've gone to the store and I've bought enough cans of Campbell's soup, I say that's enough to keep me going for a while. I don't need any more soup. I'll go buy something else. Hence, my favorite thing, Campbell's soup, might not be my favorite after I've had more than enough of them. So the theory helps explain why we might change our mind on what is our favorite. Another interesting thing that comes of this is what determines your priority in spending. And again, it just builds on that first one. And here's a classic example. It's called the diamond water paradox. And the diamond water paradox is an interesting one. Let's assume you're out in the desert and you haven't had anything to drink for 2 days. The most important thing in your world is going to be water, right? You're going to want water, water, water. That classic guy in the desert looking for water. Don't have any water. I have some diamonds. You want a diamond instead? You're probably going to say, no, I don't want a diamond. Okay? Because diamonds aren't going to keep you alive. Water keeps you alive. Diamonds don't. That's interesting. Let's assume that I've given you a glass of water now. You've been out in the desert for all that length of time. And now I say to you, you want a diamond now? And you say, yeah, I'd love a diamond now. Why did you suddenly switch your point of view? You didn't want a diamond when you were thirsty and out in the desert for 3 days. Now that you've got a drink of water, though, suddenly you're saying, I prefer diamonds over water. What happened? Okay, so this is really what the crux of this argument is all about, is that certain products have very high elasticities. Water, even though it's so essential to us and it's so valuable to us, once we've had enough of it, the value of additional water drops very, very quickly. If you needed water to live, you have a drink, you're satisfied, that's it. You don't need any more water. So the marginal utility of water is very high. In other words, let's assume that first glass of water is worth 200. The second glass of water is really more than you need, so it only has a value of 1. So it dropped really, really fast. Diamonds, on the other hand, we don't need diamonds to survive, but people like diamonds. And if you got a diamond, okay, great. Diamond would have a good utility of, say, 200. Again, then I offered you another diamond. Will the second diamond diminish in value as quickly as, say, the water did? Probably not, because the sparkling shiny of diamond is more appealing over more diamonds than water is more appealing for drinking. So certain products have high elasticities of demand, and diamonds are not as elastic in terms of once you've had one, you'd still like another one, whereas water is very elastic. So the application of this in the real world is more like to do with income, and you think about what products do you tend to buy, and generally if you're well off, you can pretty well buy whatever you want, right? So you can switch between necessity and a nice to have very easily. So nice to have stuff is valuable to you. But let's assume you have no money. If you have no money, you're only concerned about necessities. You're not interested. You wouldn't even consider nice to haves. So we've got to think about, research has consistently demonstrated that poor families spend a larger portion of their income on necessities. That's true. That is the fact. So they don't have a lot of time for fluff, we'll call it. Whereas people who are better off have their basic needs taken care of. You think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs when we do organizational behavior. Most of their needs are taken care of. So your spending priorities are going to change as your income goes up. That's the basic gist of that. Another interesting one that comes of marginal utility theory is this idea or challenge to the idea that the value of things drop. Like, for example, the first piece of cheesecake had a high value in terms of utility. Second piece, it fell off the table. It wasn't very good. But did that happen to everything? Do certain things get better with age? The more I have of it, the more I like it. And economists have looked at this, and people have came up and said, art or music, I really appreciate it. The more I hear it, the more I appreciate the sound, and the more I appreciate the music. Like this album here, for example, I have this. It's Supertramp. Now, many of you are going to say, I don't know that album. But, I look at it in the context of time. This album came out in, I'm thinking 1981. It might have been 78. But anyway, it's around 81 is when I found out about it. Okay, I know that because it was my graduation year from high school. Here you go. There's a dating for me. And I remember we were decorating the gym. And I was listening to this album. And I thought, wow, that's a cool album. The piano in it's great. And oh man, there's really some cool tunes on it, especially the Even in the Quietest Moments song, which was the W5 theme after for years, And every time I hear that album, it brings me back to high school and that sort of thing. So I appreciate it the more I hear it. Now, do I hear it extremely a lot? No, I don't have it on constant play, not at all. But I appreciate the album the more I hear it. Now, you're going to say, well, gee, Paul, that was 40 years ago. Come on now, that breaks this narrow length of time. And it does, really. It really is over a longer period of time. But I can understand the concept that certain works of art or certain things, wine, if you're a wine collector, or art on the wall or that sort of thing, or movies or these sorts of things, you could appreciate it more and more, like Ferris Bueller or Stand By Me, some of my favorite movies. I like them over time. They're still just good now as the first time I saw them. So the argument is that the law of diminishing utility really applies to purchases as opposed to, this is not really, every time I listen to Supertramp, even in the quietest moments, I didn't purchase it every time. This is just using it. So it's repeated consumption, not in the purchasing, but in the listening. So the argument is that the rule applies to purchasing only as opposed to listening or watching or seeing. But some things do improve with age. I think that's they grant that will be the case. So they've kind of narrowed the rule and say only dealing with purchasing. I bought this album 3 times. I had a cassette of it, I had a CD, I had a record of it, and I had a CD of it. And if you count the fact that I got it on Spotify now, I got a Spotify of it. So, maybe I have purchased it a few times. The other thing is, should incomes be equally more distributed? And okay, this is a social argument that we're using here, and we talked about in the case of people being poor or people not having enough to live or these sorts of things. So the flip of being poor is being extremely rich. And the basic theory is that, okay, considering marginal utility theory, if I have loads and loads and loads of money, okay, $1 extra is not going to be that valuable to me. If I got $1 million and someone gives me $1, it's not going to be that much more valuable to me. Big deal. It's only $1. Whereas if I'm really, really, really poor and someone gives me $1, wow, that extra $1 is going to be very helpful. I'll appreciate it much more. So the contrarian is, if I were to take money away in form of taxes from rich people, so rich people can afford to pay more and they won't miss it because they have so much, they're not going to miss it. Whereas poor people, if you tax them, they're really going to miss it because they value their dollars more. So this is an argument that, for example, in the election past, we saw tax the rich. The NDP were saying this. And it's based on this marginal utility theory. It says if you have a lot anyway, you're not going to miss a little bit taken away from you, even though that little bit might be a great amount for someone who's poor. So, money it could be argued, has a diminishing marginal utility. The more you have, the less valuable each successive extra bit becomes. So some might argue that this is making strong grounds for advocating a more equitable distribution of income and wealth, since the gain in marginal utility by the poor would be so much greater. They'd appreciate the extra dollar so much more than the rich, because they have so much anyway. What do they need so much for? If we were to take some away from them in the form of taxes, they wouldn't miss it. So that's an interesting debate that is based on this concept of marginal utility that we're talking about here. Now, we also have this very interesting one, and I'll just finish off with that here today, and that's this idea of consumer surplus. How many times have you gone to the store and got what you consider a deal? Now, you got what you consider a deal. Wow. Why did you consider it a deal? Under what circumstances do we run into a situation where we buy things that we consider a deal? And it's really in our mind, isn't it? Because you go prepared to pay an amount of money for something. Let's assume you wanted to buy a bearing for your 1985 Big Red. Okay? And you're prepared in your mind to pay $25 for it. I'm willing to pay $25 for a bearing. I go up to the store and I find that I can buy it for $12.50. Wow. Am I pleased? Yes, because in my mind, mentally, I was prepared to pay $25. I got it for half that price. This is what's known as consumer surplus. In my mind, I have an amount in my mind that I'm willing to pay. The reality is I didn't have to pay that much. Any difference between what I was prepared to pay and what I actually paid is considered as consumer surplus. You feel really good about consumer surplus. That's what stores try to do. Why does Costco, Walmart try to give prices or put stuff out in the center aisle or put stuff on the way into Costco that they know people would like to buy, and put it at a price where people feel they're getting a bargain? And that makes them feel good when they enter the store or when they walk through the main aisle of the store, and they know that they'll spend more if they feel good. So using this concept of consumer surplus, stores use it in marketing in order to encourage more purchasing. So the basic concept of consumer surplus says that the marginal consumer surplus is the difference between the dollar marginal utility of the unit and the price you paid. In other words, this is how much you're willing to spend. This is what you actually spend. If there's a gap, that's consumer surplus. And so you can see here in this little example, consumers, and this is chunks of consumers, they would have been willing to pay. This is what they actually paid. So whatever they actually paid less, whatever they would have paid less what they actually paid is consumer surplus. So we can measure consumer surplus for society as a whole. And there's been lots of studies done, for example, Walmart, and they estimate that because Walmart has these prices, it saves consumers about $300 to $400 a year based on standard products. And Walmart's full aware of that. And this is what they target their marketing on, is the fact that our low prices give you an opportunity to spend your money somewhere else and save on the necessities that they sell. So the consumer surplus is a very critical one that stores often apply whenever they're into marketing products and services.